The night was colder than usual in New York City. The kind of night where the wind bit at your skin and even the neon lights of Times Square seemed dimmer. People hurried past with their collars turned up, chasing warmth, chasing time, chasing life. But on the steps of the Harrington Hotel, a glass tower of wealth and privilege, sat a woman who had nothing left to chase. Her name was Emily Carter. As she was clutching a worn-out backpack like it was the last piece of her identity. Her clothes were thin, her eyes hollow, but there was a defiance in the way she sat there, chin lifted against the cruelty of the night. That was when Alexander Harrington, the heir to the Harrington fortune, stepped out of the revolving doors. He was drenched in the kind of wealth that made people turn their heads, custom suit, polished shoes, and a driver waiting with the car door open. But his eyes weren't shining with pride. They were filled with something darker, desperation. He paused when he saw her. Emily didn't look away. Most people did. Most people avoided the shame of meeting the eyes of someone life had crushed. But not him. And not her. "Stand up," he said suddenly, his voice low, almost breaking. Emily frowned, hugging her backpack tighter. "Why?" "Because I'm going to make you an offer no one else ever will." He stepped closer, the streetlight casting shadows across his sharp jawline. His breath was unsteady, his hands trembling as though he was on the edge of a decision that could ruin him. "I'll pay you $10,000, he said, each word heavy, deliberate. "If you agree to marry me for 30 days, Emily blinked, her lips parting in disbelief. She almost laughed, almost. But the look in his eyes told her this wasn't a joke. "And why?" she asked slowly. "Would a millionaire need to buy a wife for 30 days?" Alexander's chest rose and fell, his voice breaking as he answered. "Because if I don't, I lose everything. My family, my company, my future." The city seemed to fall silent in that moment, the traffic and chaos melting into the background. Emily's heart pounded. For her, $10,000 was a miracle. For him, 30 days was salvation. But as their gazes locked in the icy night, both of them realized something neither could explain. This wasn't just a transaction. This was the beginning of a storm that would change them both forever. The night pressed heavy over New York, the kind of night where the cold felt alive, creeping into every corner of the city. The streets glittered with rain, neon lights reflecting off puddles like broken promises scattered across the concrete. Taxis honked, hurried footsteps echoed, and people disappeared into warm apartments without giving a glance to those left behind. On the wide marble steps of the Harrington Hotel, a tower of wealth and reputation, sat a young woman who looked like she didn't belong in that world of chandeliers and silk gowns. Her name was Emily Carter. She sat curled up against the side railing, hugging an old backpack to her chest. The zipper was broken, the fabric faded, yet her grip on it was fierce, as if it carried the last remnants of who she was. Her brown hair was damp from the drizzle, clinging to her cheeks. Her eyes, though shadowed by exhaustion, carried something sharper, something that hadn't been broken yet, no matter how cruel the world had been to her. She wasn't begging, she wasn't calling for help. She simply sat with her chin lifted, proud in her silence, even as strangers passed by without sparing her a second glance. Inside those hotel walls, chandeliers sparkled, violins played, and laughter spilled from a ballroom where fortunes were flaunted and promises sealed. Outside, Emily's stomach growled, but her pride wouldn't let her reach for the leftovers in the trash bins. She would rather starve than be pitied. And that was when he appeared. Alexander Harrington, heir to the Harrington Empire, a man whose last name could open doors in any city across the world. His life had been one of privileged private schools, luxury cars, deals worth millions before he'd even turned 30. Yet tonight, his shoulders carried a weight that bent him low, as if wealth had no power against the storm raging inside him. He pushed open the glass doors, stepping into the rain without an umbrella, ignoring the driver who rushed after him. His tailored suit was perfect, but his tie hung loose, his eyes unfocused. He looked like a man who had run out of time. He stopped when he saw her. Emily didn't flinch. She was used to people staring at her, sometimes with pity, sometimes with disgust. But the way Alexander looked at her was different. It wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was recognition. as though he saw something in her that reminded him of himself. "Stand up," he said suddenly, his voice raw, strained. Emily tightened her arms around her backpack. "Why?" "Because I have something to ask you," he said, taking a step closer. His voice shook, though he tried to steady it. He had been raised to command boardrooms, to silence arguments with a single word, but right now, he sounded almost desperate. Emily raised an eyebrow. "If you're about to offer me spare change, don't bother. I don't sell my dignity for coins." For a brief second, the corner of his lips lifted in something like admiration. "No, that's not what I'm offering," he exhaled sharply, as though saying the words would cost him everything. "I'll pay you $10,000, he said slowly, each word deliberate. "If you agree to marry me for 30 days, the rain seemed to hush around them, as if even the city itself paused to hear her reaction. Emily blinked, her lips parting in disbelief. She studied his face, waiting for the smirk, the punchline of a cruel joke. But his expression was serious, haunted even. His hands trembled at his sides, and for the first time, she noticed the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that money couldn't cure. "You can't be serious," she said finally, her voice low. "I've never been more serious," he replied. Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. "Why would a man like you, who could have anyone, stand in the rain offering marriage to a stranger on a hotel step?" His chest rose and fell heavily. He hesitated, as though revealing the truth was harder than any deal he had ever made. "Because, if I don't," he said at last, his voice breaking, "I lose everything, my family's trust, my company, my future." Emily stared at him, her brows knitting together. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell him to leave her alone, but the look in his eyes, raw, vulnerable, pleading, stopped her. This wasn't a man drunk on power or arrogance. This was a man cornered by circumstances, bleeding from wounds that weren't visible. She thought of her little sister, lying in a hospital bed, hooked to machines that hummed like a ticking clock, counting down the days they couldn't afford. $10,000 could buy more time, medicine, treatments, maybe even hope. Still, her pride held her back. "You're asking me to sell myself," she whispered, her throat tight. "No," Alexander said quickly, stepping closer, his voice urgent. "I'm asking you to help me, and in return, I'll give you a way out of the life that's been caging you." Emily's hands shook as she gripped her backpack tighter. His words cut deep, because a part of her knew they were true. She was trapped. She had been fighting battles she couldn't win, and here he was, offering her a chance at survival at the cost of something she couldn't measure. Silence stretched between them. The city moved on, horns blaring, people rushing, but the two of them stood suspended in a moment that felt dangerously alive. Finally, Emily raised her chin, her voice quiet but firm. "If I agree, it won't be on your terms." Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. "Then what are your terms?" Her green eyes locked on his, sharp as glass. "If I marry you, even for 30 days, you won't treat me like property. You won't own me. And if I ever feel like you're breaking that agreement, I walk away with the money." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Relief washed through him. Though he could see the storm still brewing behind her gaze, he knew this wasn't going to be easy. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this agreement, born out of desperation, was about to rewrite both of their lives in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. The rain poured harder, blurring the city lights around them. Somewhere deep inside, Alexander felt the smallest flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. And Emily, though she didn't want to admit it, felt her heart shift to not with trust, not with love, but with the terrifying realization that this decision would change everything. Her answer hung in the air like a spark waiting for flame. Would she agree? Or would she walk away from the one offer that could save them both? The rain had ended by morning, but the storm between them was only just beginning. Emily stood in front of the Harrington family estate, her old backpack slung over one shoulder, her worn shoes sinking slightly into the gravel driveway. The house looked less like a home and more like a fortress: white columns, iron gates, and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. Every inch of it screamed power, wealth, and privilege. Alexander walked ahead of her, his stride long, purposeful, but beneath his polished exterior was tension. He had convinced her to agree 30 days, $10,000, but now came the part he had been dreading, introducing her to a world where she didn't belong. Emily kept her expression unreadable, but her heart was a storm of doubts. She wasn't intimidated by wealth. No, she was wary of it, of the way it made people cruel without even realizing it. She thought of her sister lying in a hospital bed, pale and fragile, and forced herself to keep moving. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was survival. As they entered the grand hall, marble floors stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the golden chandeliers above. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, carrying trays and whispering to one another. Emily felt their eyes on her, curious, judging, dismissive. She lifted her chin higher, refusing to shrink. "Stay close," Alexander murmured, his voice low. "I wasn't planning on running," Emily replied, though her pulse was racing. At the far end of the hall, a pair of double doors opened, revealing an older woman seated on a velvet chair. Her posture was regal, her pearls perfectly aligned around her neck, her eyes sharp as crystal. This was Eleanor Harrington, Alexander's grandmother, the matriarch of the empire. Alexander paused, drawing in a steadying breath before speaking. "Grandmother, this is Emily, my fiancée." The word felt heavy, foreign. Even though it was only part of the arrangement, Eleanor's eyes swept over Emily like a blade, taking in her simple clothes, her scuffed shoes, the defiance in her stance. She arched a brow. "Fiancée? How convenient. Last I recall, your engagement was to Miss Davenport, a woman of breeding and reputation. And now, days later, you bring this?" Emily felt the sting of the words, but refused to look away. She met Eleanor's gaze head-on. "This has nothing to do with convenience. I'm here because he asked me to be." The older woman's lips curved into something resembling a smirk. "Is that so? And what did he offer you in return? A fairy tale?" Ending. The room grew heavy with silence. Alexander's fists clenched at his sides, his voice hardening. "That's enough, grandmother." But Emily spoke before he could say more. "No, let her ask." She said quietly, "I won't pretend. He offered me a deal, and I accepted. But don't mistake that for weakness. I'm not here to be bought, and I'm not here to please you." A flicker of surprise passed through Eleanor's eyes. For the briefest moment, her sharp mask cracked, replaced by curiosity. But then it was gone. "We'll see," she murmured, rising from her chair. "Dinner is at 7. If you intend to play this charade, then you had better play it well." As she swept from the room, Alexander turned to Emily, guilt shadowing his face. "I didn't want it to happen like this." Emily exhaled slowly, her pride burning hotter than her fear. "I can handle her. What I'm not sure I can handle is you." Her words hit him harder than she realized. He had built walls around himself, hiding the betrayals that had broken him, and yet this stranger had walked right through them. Later that evening, Emily found herself standing in front of a mirror in a guest room larger than her entire apartment had been. A dress lay across the bed, chosen by one of the staff at Eleanor's request. It was elegant, silk that shimmered under the light, a gown that belonged to someone else's life. Emily hesitated, fingers brushing the fabric. In her reflection, she barely recognized herself once she slipped it on. She looked like a woman who belonged in that house, at that table, but inside, she still felt like the girl clutching a broken backpack, fighting to hold her world together. When Alexander knocked and entered, his breath caught for a fraction of a second. He masked it quickly, but Emily noticed. She turned, folding her arms. "Don't look at me like that. This isn't real." His jaw tightened. "It has to look real. For them, for us, for you," she corrected, her eyes steady. "This is for you." Dinner was a battlefield. The long table stretched endlessly, filled with silverware Emily didn't know the names of, dishes she had never seen before. Eleanor sat at the head, her expression unreadable, while other family members and business associates whispered behind polite smiles. Emily sat beside Alexander, her back straight, her nerves hidden behind an iron will. Every question thrown at her was a test: where she had studied, what her family did, how she had met Alexander. She deflected gracefully, never giving more than she wanted. She could feel Eleanor watching her, searching for cracks, waiting for her to crumble. But Emily didn't crumble. She played her part with quiet strength, and though she hated the pretense, she refused to give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing her falter. As the meal ended, Alexander leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were incredible tonight." Emily turned her head, her eyes meeting his. "I wasn't pretending for them. I was surviving. That's what I do." He studied her for a long moment, as though seeing her not as a pawn in his desperate plan, but as someone who carried her own battles, her own scars. And for the first time since this arrangement had begun, Alexander wondered if this woman who had stepped into his life out of nowhere was not the answer to his problems, but the beginning of a story far larger than either of them expected. What neither of them knew was that someone else at that table had been watching to a man with eyes sharp as steel, who had every reason to see Alexander fall, and he had just discovered the perfect weapon to make it happen. The days that followed blurred into something Emily hadn't expected. She had walked into Alexander's world thinking it would be cold, unwelcoming, suffocating, and in many ways, it was. The staff watched her like she was a trespasser. The family treated her like a scandal waiting to happen. And Eleanor Harrington's piercing glances reminded her at every meal that she didn't belong. But beneath the weight of all that, something else began to stir. She started to notice details about Alexander she hadn't seen before. The way he carried the burdens of his empire on his shoulders. The way his voice softened when he wasn't performing for the boardroom. The way exhaustion carved lines into his face when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't the untouchable millionaire heir she thought he was. He was a man who had been betrayed, who had been cornered, who was fighting against time and family expectations. And then there were the secrets. Small at first, but undeniable. It began one night when she couldn't sleep. The vast guest room felt too big, too empty, the silence pressing in around her. She slipped quietly into the hall, wandering until she found herself outside the study. The door was slightly ajar, a warm glow spilling out. She should have turned away, but curiosity pulled her forward. Inside, Alexander sat at his desk, his tie undone, his jacket thrown carelessly across the couch. Papers were scattered in front of him, contracts, letters, documents that looked far more personal than business. He wasn't reading them, he was staring at one photograph. Emily couldn't see it clearly, but she heard his voice, low and broken. "You destroyed everything. Daniel, everything." Her heart clenched. She had heard the name before, whispered in passing when Alexander's former fiancé was mentioned, but she hadn't pressed him about it. Now she realized Daniel Foster wasn't just a rival in business, he was the man who had betrayed Alexander in a way that still burned raw. She stepped back before he could notice her, retreating to her room, but the image of him sitting there, haunted by ghosts he never spoke of, stayed with her. The next morning, Alexander was composed again, every inch the powerful air, as though the vulnerability she had glimpsed had been locked away. But Emily knew better now. Her own secrets weighed just as heavily. She hadn't told him everything. He knew about her sister's illness, yes, but not the full truth. He didn't know the debts she had taken on, the sacrifices she had made, the nights she had gone without eating so her sister could. He didn't know about the letters from the hospital that she hid at the bottom of her backpack, letters warning her that time was running out. Every day she spent in his world was another day she questioned whether she was strong enough to keep up the lie. She had told herself she was only here for survival, but the lines between survival and something more were beginning to blur. It all came to a breaking point one afternoon when she accompanied him to a charity gala. The ballroom glittered with wealth, chandeliers sparkling above gowns and tuxedos. Cameras flashed as photographers swarmed, eager to capture Alexander Harrington with his mysterious fiancé. Emily kept her smile steady, her posture graceful, even as whispers trailed behind her. "She's no one. Where did she come from? This won't last." But then she heard a voice she couldn't ignore. Well, the mighty Alexander Harrington, parading a stranger as his bride-to-be. "I expected better." The words sliced through the crowd, and when Emily turned, she saw him, Daniel Foster, tall, confident, every inch the polished businessman, but his smile was sharp, poisonous. His eyes lingered on Emily, assessing her like she was an investment he intended to break. Alexander stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening. "Daniel," he said flatly. Daniel's smirk widened. "She's lovely. A shame she has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Emily's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she lifted her chin, her voice calm but cutting. "What I've gotten myself into is none of your concern." Daniel chuckled, clearly amused by her defiance. "Strong words. I wonder how strong you'll be when the truth comes out." Before Alexander could respond, Daniel drifted away into the crowd, leaving behind a silence heavier than any insult. Emily turned to Alexander, her voice low. "What truth is he talking about?" Alexander's eyes darkened. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Emily knew better. She had seen the way Alexander's hand shook slightly when Daniel spoke, the way he avoided her gaze. Secrets were unraveling, and she was caught in the middle of them whether she wanted to be or not. That night, back at the estate, Emily confronted him. "You can't keep shutting me out," she said, standing in the doorway of his study. "If we're going to survive this arrangement, I need to know what I'm up against." "Daniel knows something. Tell me what it is." Alexander's eyes lifted. From his desk, shadows underlining the sharp lines of his face. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he pushed back his chair, rising slowly. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice low. "Daniel was once my closest friend, the man I trusted most. He betrayed me with the woman I was supposed to marry, and now he's trying to take everything else from me too. The company, the empire, everything my family built. He won't stop until he destroys me. And now that you're here, he'll use you too." Emily's breath caught, not from fear, but from anger. "Then let him try. I've been underestimated my whole life. I won't let him break me." Her words struck something in him. For the first time, Alexander looked at her not as someone he had hired, but as someone standing beside him, ready to fight. Yet even as he felt that flicker of connection, he knew Daniel was already moving his pieces, already weaving a trap. And Emily, strong, stubborn, unshakable Emily, was now his greatest vulnerability. Far away, in the quiet of his own office, Daniel poured himself a glass of wine and studied a file that bore Emily's name. A slow smile curved across his face. "If Harrington thinks she'll save him," he murmured to himself, "he's more of a fool than I thought." The game had begun, and Emily was no longer just a participant. She was the weapon. "You can't keep shutting me out," she said, standing in the doorway of his study. "If we're going to survive this arrangement, I need to know what I'm up against." "Daniel knows something. Tell me what it is." Alexander's eyes lifted from his desk, shadows underlining the sharp lines of his face. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he pushed back his chair, rising slowly. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice low. "Daniel was once my closest friend, the man I trusted most. He betrayed me with the woman I was supposed to marry, and now he's trying to take everything else from me too. The company, the empire, everything my family built. He won't stop until he destroys me. And now that you're here, he'll use you too." Emily's breath caught, not from fear, but from anger. "Then let him try. I've been underestimated my whole life. I won't let him break me." Her words struck something in him. For the first time, Alexander looked at her not as someone he had hired, but as someone standing beside him, ready to fight. Yet even as he felt that flicker of connection, he knew Daniel was already moving his pieces, already weaving a trap. And Emily, strong, stubborn, unshakable Emily, was now his greatest vulnerability. Far away, in the quiet of his own office, Daniel poured himself a glass of wine and studied a file that bore Emily's name. A slow smile curved across his face. "If Harrington thinks she'll save him," he murmured to himself, "he's more of a fool than I thought." The game had begun, and Emily was no longer just a participant. She was the weapon. The storm that Daniel hinted at arrived faster than either of them expected. Days after the gala, the estate was buzzing with rumors. Business partners whispered in corridors. Newspapers printed subtle questions about Alexander's mysterious fiancé, and Eleanor's sharp eyes seemed more watchful than ever. Emily had entered this world prepared to fight for her sister's survival, but she hadn't realized how quickly she would become the center of everyone else's battles. It began with the phone calls, anonymous voices asking questions about her past. Where had she come from? Who were her parents? Why had Alexander chosen her? At first, Emily ignored them, assuming it was nothing more than idle curiosity. But when someone left a message that included her sister's name, her blood turned cold. Whoever was digging into her life wasn't just curious, they were looking for a weakness. She confronted Alexander one evening, finding him in the study, surrounded by paperwork. His jacket was draped across the back of the chair, his tie loosened. His hands pressed into his temples as though the weight of his world was crushing him. "They're coming after me," Emily said, her voice sharper than she intended. His head lifted immediately, his eyes narrowing. "Who? I don't know. But they know about my sister. They're trying to use her against me." For a moment, anger flared across his features, anger not at her, but at the invisible hands reaching into her life. "Daniel," he muttered, almost spitting the name. "He's trying to shake you, to make you run." Emily crossed her arms, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Then he doesn't know me very well. I don't run." Alexander looked at her, truly looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, admiration, perhaps even something deeper. Though neither of them dared to name it, but Daniel was clever, and his attacks weren't always direct. A week later, Emily arrived at a charity luncheon by Alexander's side. Wearing a gown chosen by one of the staff, cameras flashed, people smiled politely. But beneath the surface, the crowd felt like sharks circling the water. Halfway through the event, a woman approached her, a tall, graceful woman with perfect posture and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, isn't it?" the woman asked, her voice sweet as honey. "I'm Vanessa Davenport. I used to be engaged to Alexander." The words cut sharper than any knife. Emily had heard the name before, but she had never met her face to face. Vanessa's beauty was undeniable, her confidence radiating like a weapon. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I know this must all feel overwhelming for you, stepping into a life you could never imagine. But you should know men like Alexander don't choose women like you. Not for long." Emily's chest tightened, but she refused to let Vanessa see it. She smiled coolly, tilting her head. "Funny, he didn't seem to think you were worth choosing either." For the briefest moment, Vanessa's mask cracked. Then she laughed softly, her eyes flashing. "We'll see how long you last." The encounter left Emily shaken, but not broken. That night, as she recounted the exchange to Alexander, his expression hardened. "Vanessa and Daniel are working together," he said grimly. "She's not here by accident. She wants to see you fail, to see me fall." Emily leaned against the desk, her voice quiet but firm. "Then we don't give her the satisfaction." What she didn't say aloud was how much the encounter had stung. Vanessa was everything Emily wasn't: refined, wealthy, accepted. And yet, Alexander had turned away from her. Why? That question lingered in the back of Emily's mind. Dangerous and tempting. As the days stretched on, Daniel's attacks grew bolder. Stories about Emily's past began appearing in gossip columns. Twisted half-truths about her family, her struggles, her desperation. One headline even claimed she was only after Alexander's money, that the engagement was nothing more than a scheme. Emily slammed the newspaper onto the table one morning, her hands shaking. "They're tearing me apart, and they don't even know me." Alexander reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was steady, grounding. "I know you. That's all that matters." Her throat tightened at his words, but she pulled her hand away, afraid of what she might feel if she let it linger. This wasn't supposed to be real. It was supposed to be an agreement, a transaction. Yet every day, the line blurred further. The breaking point came when her sister was threatened directly. Emily received a letter at the hospital, anonymous, typed but unmistakable. "Walk away from Alexander or your sister won't get the care she needs." Tears stung her eyes as she read it, her hands trembling. This was no longer just about her. They were using the one person she loved most as leverage. That night, she stormed into Alexander's office, slamming the letter onto his desk. "This is what your war has done," she said, her voice shaking with fury. They're going after her now, my sister, the only family I have left." Alexander's face darkened as he read the words. His jaw tightening, he rose from his chair, stepping closer until they were only inches apart. "I swear to you, Emily, I will protect her. I will protect you. Daniel wants to break us, but he's underestimated what I'll do to stop him." Emily's breath caught, not from fear, but from the intensity in his voice. He wasn't making a promise as part of their contract. He was making it as a man who meant every word. And for the first time, she let herself believe him, or still, she knew the fight ahead would be brutal. Daniel and Vanessa weren't finished. They were only beginning. And now, Emily wasn't just standing in Alexander's shadow, she was standing beside him. Whether she liked it or not, what none of them realized was that in Daniel's office, hidden behind locked doors, sat a file thick with secrets. Inside were photographs, documents, and a single truth that could shatter everything Emily and Alexander had built so far. The trap was nearly set, and when it closed, no amount of money, pride, or promises might be enough to save them. The Harrington estate had grown heavier with silence. Every hallway seemed to carry echoes of whispers, and every glance lingered on Emily as though waiting for her to break. Yet she didn't. If anything, the pressure only sharpened her resolve. She had spent her life fighting battles, without allies. Now, even in a house that did not welcome her, she had won, Alexander, and something between them had begun to shift. At first, Emily had told herself it was nothing more than necessity. She needed him to honor his promise, and he needed her to play the part convincingly. But as the days stretched into nights filled with quiet conversations, stolen glances, and moments where the world outside seemed to disappear, Emily found herself questioning everything she had believed. One evening, after another tense dinner where Eleanor's silence spoke louder than her words, Emily escaped into the gardens. The air was cool, the roses still heavy with dew from the afternoon rain. She leaned against the stone fountain, closing her eyes. For a brief moment, she could almost forget she was living someone else's life. Couldn't sleep either. Alexander's voice broke the quiet. Emily opened her eyes to see him standing a few feet away. His jacket draped over one shoulder, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. For once, he didn't look like the powerful heir who commanded boardrooms. He looked like a man stripped of armor. "I wasn't trying to sleep," she said softly. "I just needed to breathe." He moved closer, his footsteps deliberate, but his voice gentle. "You've been handling all of this better than anyone expected." She laughed, a sound edged with bitterness. "You mean better than your grandmother expected, or better than Vanessa predicted?" "Better than I did," he admitted, his gaze steady. "I thought this arrangement would break you, but it hasn't. If anything, you've been the one holding me together." Emily's breath caught at his words. She searched his face for signs of insincerity, but there were none. He meant it, and that terrified her more than any threat Daniel or Vanessa could throw, because if he meant it, then this was no longer just a game. Before she could respond, a light flickered in the distance, a silhouette at the edge of the garden. Someone was watching. Emily stiffened, but Alexander placed a hand on her arm. "Don't," he whispered. "That's exactly what they want." Her skin burned where his hand touched, but she nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. Whoever was watching had already seen enough. The following morning, the trap was sprung. Headlines flooded the papers. Harrington heir's fiancé exposed. A past full of lies. Photographs of Emily at her lowest moments plastered the front pages, standing in line at food banks, leaving hospitals with her sister, even sleeping in shelters. Every image was a weapon, twisted into a story she didn't recognize. At breakfast, the family sat in tense silence as Eleanor folded the newspaper with precise care. "I warned you," she said coldly to Alexander. "This girl will drag you down with her." Emily's chest tightened, but she refused to look away. "Those photos show where I've been, not who I am. If that's enough to condemn me in your eyes, then perhaps this family doesn't deserve him." Gasps rippled around the table, but Alexander's expression didn't falter. He reached for her hand beneath the table, his grip firm, protective. "I stand with her," he said. The words silenced the room, but they ignited something far louder inside Emily. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this was more than performance. That night, the storm finally broke. Daniel himself appeared at the estate, uninvited, yet walking with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the ground beneath his feet. He was escorted into the study, where Alexander and Emily stood waiting. "You're reckless, Harrington," Daniel said, tossing a file onto the desk, clinging to someone who will ruin you. "But I'll give you one last chance. Step aside, hand over the company, and I'll make sure her little secrets don't destroy her completely." Emily's hands curled into fists. "You don't scare me." Daniel's smile widened. "You should be scared, because the next secret I reveal won't just stain your reputation, it will shatter you." Alexander stepped between them, his voice low and lethal. "You've already taken enough from me. You won't touch her." For the first time, Daniel's expression flickered not with fear, but with recognition. He saw it too. Alexander wasn't protecting a pawn in a game. He was protecting someone who mattered. When Daniel left, the silence between them was heavy. Emily turned to Alexander, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Why are you doing this? You don't have to defend me." "Yes, I do," he said, his eyes locking on hers. "Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about a contract." Her heart stuttered. She wanted to deny it, to remind him this was supposed to end in 30 days. But instead, she whispered the truth she had been fighting to ignore. "It stopped being about that for me too." The confession hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, and yet, before either of them could say more, a knock at the door interrupted them. A servant stepped inside, holding another envelope. This one wasn't addressed to Alexander. It was addressed to Emily. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph of her sister in her hospital bed, asleep. On the back, scrawled in sharp letters, "30 days will cost you more than you can pay." Emily's knees nearly buckled, and Alexander caught her before she could fall. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled as he held her. "They've made their move. Now it's our turn." The game had changed. No longer was it about reputation, money, or contracts. This was about survival. This was about protecting the only people who mattered. And as Alexander held her, Emily realized something terrifying and undeniable. Walking away was no longer an option. She was bound to him now, not by a deal, but by a truth she could no longer run from. The 30 days were almost over, but their story was only just beginning. Asterisk. The envelope was still on the desk when the clock struck midnight, its threat echoing louder than the ticking of time itself. Emily sat by the window of the Harrington estate, her eyes fixed on the gardens drenched in silver moonlight. Alexander stood near the fireplace, shoulders tense, his hands pressed to the mantel as though holding the entire world in place. Neither spoke at first, but both understood the silence was only a fragile pause before the storm ahead. "They know about her," Emily whispered finally, her voice breaking the heavy quiet. "They know where she is. If they can reach my sister once, they can do it again." Alexander turned, his eyes burning with a determination she had never seen before. "Then we won't let them. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not anyone." His words were fierce, but she saw the strain in him, the way loyalty, rage, and fear twisted inside like wires pulled too tight. It wasn't just his empire at stake anymore. It was the one fragile piece of family Emily had left. And if her sister fell, Emily knew she would never forgive herself. Alexander crossed the room and crouched before her, taking her hands. "Look at me. I can fight for the company. I can fight for myself. But for you, for her, I will burn the world down if I have to." Emily's breath caught. There had been moments when she thought she imagined his devotion, moments when she told herself this was still only a contract, but this was not performance. His voice, his grip, the fire in his eyes, this was real, terrifyingly real. Before she could answer, the door burst open. Eleanor entered, regal as always, but her stern face was carved with something unfamiliar, fear. She held her own letter in her hand, crumpled from the strength of her grip. "They've crossed the line," she said tightly, tossing the paper onto the desk. "This threat is not just against you, Alexander, or your fiancé. They're coming for all of us." Emily read the note, her stomach sinking. "The Harrington legacy dies in 30 days. The message was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't content with scandals or whispers. They wanted destruction. That night, Plans were made. Security was doubled at the hospital where Emily's sister stayed. Investigators were hired. Old alliances were questioned. But even as the estate bristled with defenses, Emily felt the enemy tightening their net. And then, in the middle of it all, came an unexpected twist. Emily received a second letter. Unlike the first, it wasn't threatening. It was almost pleading. The handwriting was shaky, the words uneven. "They're not who you think. Meet me where it began, or she will pay the price." Her heart pounded. This wasn't Daniel's style. It wasn't Vanessa's either. It was someone else, someone who knew her past. And though every instinct screamed danger, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She showed Alexander, expecting him to forbid her from going. Instead, he studied the letter carefully, then met her gaze with steady resolve. "We'll go together." The following evening, under the cover of night, they slipped away from the estate. The city streets stretched before them, familiar yet cloaked in menace. They followed the directions in the letter until they reached a place Emily hadn't set foot in for years, the shelter where she and her sister had once lived. The building was quiet, its bricks worn by time. Inside, the smell of dust and old wood lingered, and waiting in the corner was a figure Emily almost didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carter," Emily breathed, her voice trembling. The shelter's former caretaker, the woman who had once helped feed. Her and her sister looked frailer than Emily remembered, her hands shaking as she clutched another envelope. "They used me," Mrs. Carter whispered, tears filling her eyes. "They said if I didn't help them, they'd take everything I had left. I told them where to find your sister. I never meant for this to happen." Emily's chest constricted, torn between anger and pity. "Who are they? Tell me." The woman glanced over her shoulder as though shadows themselves were listening. "It isn't just Daniel. He's only a face, a puppet. The real hand pulling the strings is someone closer, someone in your circle." The words struck like a blade. Emily turned to Alexander, who was already scanning the room, jaw tight. "Closer how?" he demanded. Before Mrs. Carter could answer, the door slammed open. A figure stepped inside, backlit by the street lamp, confidence radiating from every line of their posture. Emily's breath caught as recognition dawned. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Vanessa. It was someone she had trusted, someone who had sat across from her at the Harrington dinner table. The betrayal was a knife to the heart. "You?" Emily's voice cracked, disbelief and fury colliding. After everything, the betrayer smiled, cold and calculated. "Did you really think you could step into this world without consequence? Every empire is built on sacrifice, and tonight, you'll learn what yours will cost." Alexander stepped in front of Emily, his presence a shield. "If you want to destroy me, then face me, but leave her out of this." "On the contrary," the betrayer said softly, "she's the key. Without her, you're just a man with a crumbling fortune. With her, you're vulnerable, and that is far more satisfying." Emily's mind raced, torn between the urge to fight and the crushing weight of betrayal. The shelter walls felt too small, the air too thin, yet even in the midst of fear, something hardened inside her. She had survived hunger, loss, and despair. She would survive this to and as Alexander reached for her hand, steadying her against the storm, Emily whispered words that startled even herself. "They want me broken, but I won't break. Not now. Not ever." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a promise that no threat, no betrayal, and no empire would define her. The 30 days had become a battlefield, and Emily knew this final chapter would decide not just their future, but the future of everyone tied to the Harrington name, because sometimes love wasn't the soft thing people wrote about. Sometimes love was fire, and together they were about to set the darkness alight.